The Meridian Piano Lounge stood empty after midnight, the last patrons long gone. Only the soft click of heels against hardwood floors broke the silence as Valentina moved between tables, wiping surfaces and collecting forgotten glasses. At 45, she had perfected the art of becoming invisible, blending into the background of the upscale venue where Chicago's elite came to enjoy cocktails and live piano music. Tonight, like most nights, Valentina saved the grand piano for last. The magnificent instrument sat on a small raised platform in the corner of the room, its polished black surface gleaming under the dimmed lights. As she approached with her cleaning cloth, she paused. Glancing around the empty room, this was her favorite part of the night. With gentle motions, she ran her cloth over the piano's surface, careful not to press too hard against the delicate wood. As she worked, a familiar melody rose in her mind, one she hadn't been able to shake for days. Without thinking, she began to hum softly, her voice barely audible even in the quiet room. The notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from her lips with surprising precision. Her humming followed the complex melody with the natural ease of someone who understood its structure intimately. As she reached a particularly difficult passage, her fingers lifted from the piano's surface, moving through the air as if playing invisible keys. "You know Chopin?" The voice startled her so badly she nearly knocked over a bottle of polish. Valentina spun around to find Richard Hayes, the owner of the Meridian, standing by the bar with a stack of paperwork in his hands. She hadn't heard him come in. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, clutching her cleaning cloth. "I didn't mean to—" "No, please," Richard said, setting down his papers and walking toward her. "I'm the one who should apologize for startling you." He was a tall man in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I just couldn't help noticing how beautifully you were humming that piece." Valentina felt heat rise to her cheeks. In the 3 months she'd been working at the Meridian, she'd exchanged perhaps a dozen words with the owner. He was always polite but distant, busy with the demanding work of running one of Chicago's most popular piano lounges. "It's just something I heard the pianist play," she said, turning back to her work. Richard leaned against the wall, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "No, it's more than that. You weren't just humming the melody. You were following the left-hand arpeggios and the harmonic structure. That's not something you pick up just by listening casually." Valentina's hands stilled on the piano surface. For a moment, she considered making an excuse and finishing her cleaning in another part of the lounge. But something in Richard's expression, genuine interest without judgment, made her pause. "I used to know a little about music," she admitted. "A little?" Richard smiled. "That's like saying Lake Michigan holds a little water." Despite her embarrassment, Valentina found herself returning his smile. It had been a long time since anyone had noticed anything about her beyond her ability to clean efficiently. "Would you like some coffee?" Richard asked suddenly. "I was about to make some for myself. It helps me get through these financial reports." He gestured toward the papers he'd left on the bar. Valentina glanced at her watch. It was already past 1 in the morning, and she still had to catch the night bus home to her small apartment in Pilsen. But the unexpected kindness in the offer made her hesitate. "Just 1 cup," she agreed. 10 minutes later, they sat at one of the small tables near the windows overlooking the Chicago River. The city lights reflected off the water's surface, creating dancing patterns that shifted with each passing boat. "So," Richard said, warming his hands around his mug, "tell me about your little knowledge of music." Valentina looked down at her coffee. It had been years since she'd spoken about this part of her life. In Chicago, she was just another immigrant cleaning woman, someone whose backstory rarely interested the people whose spaces she maintained. "I studied piano," she said finally. "A long time ago in Buenos Aires." Richard's eyebrows rose. "Argentina? You studied at the conservatory there?" Valentina nodded, surprised by his knowledge. "Yes, for almost 6 years. That's one of the most prestigious music schools in South America," Richard said, leaning forward with growing interest. "What happened? Why did you stop?" The question landed heavily between them. Valentina took a sip of her coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. The story was old now, the pain dulled by time, but speaking it aloud still felt like opening a door to a room she had locked long ago. "Life happened," she said simply. "My father died suddenly when I was 23. Heart attack. My mother couldn't work, She had severe arthritis, and my younger brothers were still in school. She shrugged, a small gesture that attempted to minimize 2 decades of sacrifice. Someone had to provide. Richard nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. So you gave up music. I gave up playing, Valentina corrected him gently. Not music. That stays with you no matter what. A comfortable silence fell between them as they both sipped their coffee. Through the windows they could see a late-night water taxi gliding past, its lights cutting through the darkness. Have you played at all since then? Richard asked finally. Valentina shook her head. Not really. We sold our piano to pay for my father's funeral. And then, she made a vague gesture with her hand, encompassing everything that had followed. The years of working multiple jobs, the eventual move to the United States, the endless cycle of cleaning offices and homes and venues like the Meridian. But you still remember, Richard observed, the way you were humming that nocturne. Some things your fingers don't forget, Valentina said with a small smile. Even after 20 years. Richard seemed about to say something more when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Sorry, I need to take this, he said, standing. It's my regular pianist, Tony. He never calls this late unless it's important. As Richard stepped away to answer the call, Valentina finished her coffee. She should go. The night bus would be coming soon, and she still needed to put away her cleaning supplies. But as she gathered her things, she couldn't help glancing back at the grand piano. In the dim light, it seemed almost to be calling to her. 20 years since she'd last felt the weight of ivory keys beneath her fingers. 20 years of music locked inside her with nowhere to go. Without thinking, she crossed the room and stood beside the piano again. She reached out a hand but stopped just short of touching the keys. What was she doing? This wasn't her world anymore, Valentina. Richard's voice sounded strained as he returned, sliding his phone into his pocket. His face had lost its earlier warmth, replaced by the tight expression of someone receiving unwelcome news. Is everything all right? She asked. Not exactly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. That was Tony. He's in the hospital, appendicitis. They're doing emergency surgery tonight. I'm sorry to hear that, Valentina said sincerely. Will he be okay? The doctors say he should recover fine, but he'll be out for at least 2 weeks. Richard leaned against the piano, looking suddenly exhausted. And I have the charity gala on Friday, the biggest event of the year for the Meridian, and now no pianist. Valentina began gathering her cleaning supplies, feeling she should give him space to work through this problem. I'm sure you'll find someone, she offered. Chicago has many musicians. Richard nodded absently, then suddenly froze, his gaze sharpening as he looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, a spark of an idea taking hold. Valentina, he said slowly, you said you studied at the Buenos Aires Conservatory. She stilled, immediately understanding where his thoughts were headed. Mr. Hayes, that was a lifetime ago. I haven't touched a piano in 20 years. But you could, he pressed. Couldn't you? Just one song at the gala. A nervous laugh escaped her. You're joking. I'm completely serious. Richard straightened, energy returning to his movements. Listen, I know it sounds crazy, but I've been in the music business for 30 years. I can hear talent even in someone humming a nocturne while dusting a piano. Valentina shook her head, gathering her cleaning supplies faster now. This is absurd. I clean your lounge. I'm not a performer. But you were once, Richard said, following as she moved toward the supply closet. And from what I can tell, you were probably exceptional. The compliment caught her off guard, warming something long dormant inside her. But reality quickly doused the feeling. Mr. Hayes, she said firmly, I appreciate your faith, but even if I wanted to, I couldn't possibly perform at your gala. I have no repertoire prepared, no proper clothes, and frankly, no confidence. Richard watched as she put away her supplies, his expression thoughtful rather than defeated. Just think about it, he said finally. The gala isn't until Friday. That gives you 3 days. You could come in early tomorrow and try the piano, see how it feels. If it's terrible, we'll never speak of it again. Valentina closed the supply closet door and turned to face him. Why would you take such a risk? This gala is important to you. Richard leaned against the wall, his expression softening. 20 years ago, someone took a chance on me when I was just a kid with a dream of opening a music venue. Sometimes we all need someone to see something in us that we've forgotten is there. Outside, the night bus honked as it approached Valentina's stop. She grabbed her coat and purse, heading toward the door. "I have to go," she said. "Just think about it," Richard called after her. "That's all I'm asking." As Valentina hurried toward the bus stop, her mind was already racing with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in decades. The feel of piano keys beneath her fingers. The sound of music, her music, filling a room. The weight of expectant eyes upon her. The thought terrified her. And yet something else fluttered beneath the fear, something that felt dangerously like hope. Valentina didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling as memories she'd kept locked away for 20 years came flooding back. The countless hours of practice in her childhood home. The stern but encouraging words of her piano teacher, Professor Morales. The way her father would sit in their tiny living room, eyes closed, listening to her play with a smile that made all the hard work worthwhile. And then there were the darker memories, selling their family piano to pay for her father's funeral, watching her mother's health decline, working 3 jobs to put her brothers through school. Music had been the first sacrifice, but not the last. By morning, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but her mind was made up. She would at least try the piano at the Meridian just to see. Nothing more. When she arrived for her evening shift the following day, she found a note taped to the employee entrance. "Come 2 hours early tomorrow. Piano is yours to practice. Richard." The sight of it made her stomach tighten with anxiety. Was she really considering this? Playing for a room full of Chicago's wealthiest citizens after 2 decades away from music? It was madness. And yet the next day, Valentina found herself standing outside the Meridian at 3 in the afternoon, 2 hours before her usual start time. Through the windows, she could see the grand piano waiting on its small platform, bathed in a shaft of afternoon sunlight that streamed through the skylight above. She took a deep breath and used her key to unlock the door. The lounge felt different in daylight. Less mysterious, more vulnerable somehow, like an elegant woman caught without her makeup. Chairs were still upturned on tables from the morning cleaning crew. The bar stood empty, bottles arranged in perfect rows on glass shelves. And the piano waited. You came. Valentina turned to find Richard emerging from his office, a cup of coffee in his hand and genuine pleasure in his eyes. "I'm not promising anything," she said quickly. "I just want to see if I remember how to play it all." Richard nodded, setting his coffee down on a nearby table. "Of course. No pressure. I have some work to do in my office. You'll have complete privacy." He gestured toward the piano. "Take all the time you need." As he disappeared back into his office, Valentina approached the piano slowly. She'd cleaned it dozens of times, but had never allowed herself to truly look at it as a musician. Now she noticed the fine details. The maker's name inlaid in gold script. The perfect polish of the fallboard that protected the keys. The slight wear on the pedals that spoke of years of use by skilled feet. With trembling hands, she lifted the fallboard, revealing the keyboard beneath. 88 keys of black and white that had once been as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Valentina sat on the bench, adjusting its height out of habit. Her back straightened automatically, shoulders relaxing even as her heart raced. She positioned her hands above the keys, hovering there for a long moment as if waiting for permission from some higher authority. Then slowly, she lowered her fingers to play a simple C major chord. The sound resonated through the empty lounge, clear and true. Valentina closed her eyes, letting the vibrations wash over her. How had she lived without this for so long? She began with scales, the pianist's daily bread. Her fingers were stiff at first, missing notes and stumbling over patterns that had once been automatic. But muscle memory was a powerful thing. By the 10th scale, her hands were remembering their old paths. By the 20th, they were moving with growing confidence. An hour passed as Valentina reacquainted herself with the keyboard. She moved from scales to simple etudes, then to pieces of Bach she had memorized in her youth. There were mistakes, many of them, but beneath the errors, she could feel her old skill stirring to life, like a creature awakening from a long hibernation. Finally, she allowed herself to try Chopin, the nocturne she had been humming that night. Richard overheard her. Her left hand found the rolling arpeggios while her right picked out the delicate melody. It was far from perfect, but it was music. Real music flowing from her fingers for the first time in 20 years. When she finished the piece, the final notes hanging in the air like a question, she became aware of soft applause. Richard stood in the doorway of his office, watching her with undisguised admiration. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. Valentina shook her head, embarrassed. "It was full of mistakes. My fingers won't do what they used to." "Maybe," Richard acknowledged, walking toward her. "But the musicality is still there. The feeling. That's something you can't teach, Valentina. And it's what makes a performance truly memorable." He sat on a chair near the piano, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "So, what do you think? Could you play one piece at the gala?" Valentina ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound. "The gala is in 2 days. Even if I practiced non-stop, I wouldn't be ready." "What if you don't need to be perfect?" Richard suggested. "What if being authentic is enough?" Valentina looked at him skeptically. "These are your most important clients and donors. Surely they expect professional quality." "They expect to be moved," Richard corrected her. "And what I just heard would move anyone with a heart." He leaned back, studying her. "What piece would you play if you decided to do it?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't gotten that far in her thinking. "I don't know," she said. "Something I used to know well. Something I could recover in 2 days of practice." "Like what?" Valentina thought for a moment, her mind sorting through the repertoire she had once mastered. Most of it would be beyond her current abilities, but perhaps Rachmaninoff, she said finally. "His Piano Concerto No. 2, the second movement." Richard's eyebrows shot up. "That's ambitious." "I performed it for my graduation recital," Valentina explained. "I must have practiced it 1,000 times."
If there's anything my hands might remember completely, it would be that. It's also one of the most beloved pieces in classical music, Richard said thoughtfully.
"Even people who know nothing about classical music recognize that melody. Which means they'll also recognize every mistake I make," Valentina pointed out. Richard shook his head. "That's not how music works, and you know it. People don't remember the wrong notes. They remember how you made them feel." Valentina turned back to the piano, playing the opening chords of the Rachmaninoff piece. The rich harmonies filled the room, stirring something deep inside her. Could she really do this? Step out of the shadows and back into the light, even for just one night? "I would need to practice," she said slowly. "Many hours." "The piano is yours whenever the lounge is closed," Richard said immediately. "And I can arrange to have someone cover your cleaning shifts until the gala." "I still need to clean," Valentina said firmly. "I need the money." "Then you'll be paid for your regular shifts and you'll practice instead of cleaning. Consider it a performance fee." Valentina shook her head, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Why are you doing this?" Richard was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When I was younger, I wanted to be a jazz saxophonist," he said finally. "I was good, not great, but good enough to make a living. Then I injured my hand in an accident. 3 surgeries later, I could hold a glass and button my shirt. But I couldn't play anymore." He flexed his right hand unconsciously, and for the first time, Valentina noticed the slight stiffness in his movements. "I was lucky," he continued. "I had other skills. I opened this place and found a different way to keep music in my life. But I still remember what it felt like to play, to have that connection with an audience, to speak without words." He met her eyes. "Not everyone gets a second chance at that feeling. I can give you one if you're brave enough to take it." His words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an invitation. Valentina looked down at her hands, the hands of a cleaning woman, with calluses in different places than a pianist's hands, with a small burn scar on one thumb from an iron, with short nails kept practical for scrubbing floors, but still her hands. "One piece," she said finally. "Just the Rachmaninoff, and if I don't feel ready by Friday morning, I don't play." "Agreed," Richard said, unable to hide his smile. "One piece, your choice to cancel, no questions asked." Valentina nodded, suddenly dizzy with the decision. What had she just agreed to? "I should start practicing then," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll get you some dinner sent in," Richard replied, standing. "Can't have my soloist hungry." He started toward his office, then paused. "Oh, and Valentina, don't worry about what to wear. My sister owns a boutique. She'll help you find something perfect." As he disappeared into his office, Valentina turned back to the piano. Her hands were shaking slightly as she positioned them over the keys again. 2 days to relearn a piece she hadn't played in 20 years. 2 days to decide if she was really going to step onto that small platform and show the world a side of herself she had buried long ago. She began to play the opening of the Rachmaninoff again, letting the familiar patterns guide her fingers. One wrong note, then another. She stopped, took a deep breath, and started once more. This time the phrase emerged more smoothly, the melody singing above the rich harmonies beneath. Outside the windows of the Meridian, Chicago continued its busy afternoon. Cars honking, people rushing to meetings, trains rumbling on elevated tracks. But inside, time seemed to slow as Valentina reconnected with a part of herself she had thought was gone forever. Note by note, measure by measure, she began the journey back to who she had once been. Not to stay there, but to bring that young pianist forward into the present, to merge her with the woman she had become in the intervening years. A woman who had survived loss and hardship. A woman who had crossed borders and built a new life. A woman who had kept music in her heart, even when her fingers were silent. Perhaps that woman had something worth sharing after all. The next morning arrived with weak winter sunlight filtering through Valentina's apartment window. She had barely slept, her mind replaying fragments of Rachmaninoff throughout the night. Her fingers had twitched against the bedsheets, practicing passages she couldn't yet play smoothly. She made coffee and called her daughter, Lucia, who was away at college in Michigan. "Mama, are you serious?" Lucia exclaimed when Valentina explained what was happening. "You're going to perform? In front of people?" "Maybe," Valentina cautioned. "I still might change my mind." "No way," Lucia said firmly. "You're doing this. I've never even heard you play, not really play. Just those little songs you'd pick out on Mrs. Guzman's old upright when we visited." Valentina smiled at the memory. Their elderly neighbor had owned a battered piano that was painfully out of tune. On rare occasions when the longing became too great, Valentina would play simple melodies on it while Lucia watched with curious eyes. "This is different," Valentina said. "This is a real performance at an important event." "Good," Lucia replied. "It's about time people saw who you really are." After hanging up, Valentina stood by the window, watching the city come to life below. Who was she really? For 20 years she had been defined by what she did, cleaning homes and offices, raising her daughter, sending money back to Argentina for her mother's care. The young pianist she had once been seemed like a character from someone else's life story. And yet, when she sat at the piano yesterday, something had awakened. Not just memory, but purpose. The feeling that had come over her when the music flowed from her fingers was like reuniting with an old friend, one she hadn't realized how desperately she had missed. By 10 o'clock, she was back at the Meridian. Richard had given her a key to the main entrance, telling her to come and go as she needed. The lounge wouldn't open until 4 that afternoon, giving her hours of uninterrupted practice time. As she settled at the piano, Valentina pulled out the sheet music Richard had printed for her. Unnecessary, perhaps, as the piece was still largely in her memory, but comforting to have as a safety net. She began with scales again, warming up her fingers before diving into the Rachmaninoff. The second movement of Piano Concerto No. 2 opened with a series of gentle chords that established a bittersweet mood. As Valentina played through the introduction, she was transported back to her conservatory days, to the endless hours spent perfecting each phrase under Professor Morales's watchful eye. No, Valentina," he would say, his white mustache twitching with disapproval. "You're playing the notes, but where is the heart? This is Rachmaninoff. He writes his soul onto the page. You must find yours to play him properly." Now, 2 decades later, she understood what he meant in a way her younger self never could. Life had given her heartbreak and joy, struggle and triumph. She had more to say through the music now, if only her fingers could remember how to speak the language. For 3 hours she worked through the piece, section by section. Some passages returned easily, as if they had been waiting just beneath the surface of her consciousness. Others remained frustratingly out of reach, her fingers stumbling over transitions that had once flowed smoothly. She was deep in concentration, repeating a difficult section for the 10th time, when a soft voice interrupted her. "You're rushing the left hand there." Valentina turned to find a woman standing by the bar, watching her with keen interest. She appeared to be in her 60s with stylish silver hair and an elegant burgundy pantsuit. "I'm sorry," the woman said, stepping forward. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Diane Hayes, Richard's sister." "The boutique owner," Valentina said, remembering Richard's mention of her. Diane smiled. "That's right. though in another life I was a piano teacher at Northwestern. She approached the piano. Do you mind? Valentina shifted on the bench, making room. Diane sat beside her and played the troublesome passage, her hands moving with practiced confidence. See how the left hand creates a foundation? The right hand can sing above it, but only if that foundation is solid. Try again, but count in your head. Valentina followed her advice, and the passage immediately sounded better. Not perfect, but more cohesive. That's it. Diane nodded. You have beautiful tone. How long has it been since you've played regularly? 20 years, Valentina admitted. Diane's eyebrows rose. Then what you're doing is remarkable. Most pianists would need months to come back from such a long break. For the next hour, Diane sat with Valentina, offering gentle suggestions and occasional demonstrations. She didn't try to change Valentina's interpretation, only to help her technical execution catch up to her musical intentions. Richard told me about you, Diane said as they took a break. He was quite impressed. Valentina shook her head. He's being kind. I'm nowhere near the level I should be for this event. Don't underestimate kindness, Diane replied. It's in short supply these days. But Richard isn't just being kind, he has an ear for talent. He wouldn't have asked you to play if he didn't believe in you. She stood up. Now we should talk about what you'll wear. The gala is tomorrow night. Valentina looked down at her worn jeans and faded sweater. I don't have anything suitable. That's why I'm here, Diane smiled. We'll find something that makes you feel like the artist you are. After arranging to meet at Diane's boutique later that afternoon, Valentina returned to her practice. The session with Diane had boosted her confidence, and the troublesome passages were beginning to smooth out. As she played through the piece from beginning to end, she found herself getting lost in the music, her surroundings fading away as the emotional journey of the composition took over. This was what she had missed the most, this feeling of connection, of expressing emotions too complex for words through the universal language of music. When she finally stopped, she was surprised to find Richard standing nearby, listening with an unreadable expression. That was, he began, then shook his head as if words failed him. Valentina, you're going to amaze everyone tomorrow night. I'm still making mistakes, she said. So does every pianist who has ever lived, Richard replied. But you play with soul. That's what matters, he hesitated. I have a small confession to make. I've added your name to the printed programs. Valentina's heart skipped a beat. But I said I might still back out. You won't, Richard said simply. Not now. I can see it in your face when you play. You've remembered how much you need this. Was he right? Had music been calling to her all these years? A voice she had forced herself not to hear. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Later that afternoon, Valentina met Diane at her boutique, an elegant shop on Michigan Avenue that catered to Chicago's well-heeled professional women. Under normal circumstances, Valentina would never have entered such a place. The price tags alone would have sent her running. But Diane welcomed her warmly, turning the closed sign on the door to give Valentina her full attention. For a pianist, we need something that allows movement in the arms and shoulders, but still has presence on stage, Diane explained, moving through the racks with purpose. Color is important too. You want to be seen but not distract from the music. She selected several dresses, guiding Valentina to a spacious fitting room lined with mirrors. The first few options were beautiful but didn't feel right. Too formal, too youthful, too restrictive. Then Diane brought in a deep blue dress with a subtle shimmer to the fabric. Try this one, she said. The color reminds me of the night sky just after sunset. When Valentina emerged from the fitting room, Diane's face lit up. The dress fit perfectly, flowing gracefully while maintaining an elegant silhouette. The three-quarter sleeves allowed freedom of movement, and the color made Valentina's dark eyes stand out strikingly. Look at yourself, Diane said softly, turning Valentina toward the full-length mirror. For a moment, Valentina didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. Gone was the invisible cleaning lady, replaced by someone who commanded attention, someone who looked like she belonged on a stage. I can't accept this, Valentina said, checking the price tag. It's too expensive. It's a gift, Diane replied firmly. From Richard and me. Consider it our investment in your triumphant return to music. It's just one performance, Valentina protested. Diane's eyes twinkled. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's the beginning of something new. That evening, Valentina returned to her apartment with the dress carefully hung in a garment bag and a shoebox containing elegant but comfortable heels. As she prepared a simple dinner, her phone rang. Lucia again. "I've decided to come home for the weekend," her daughter announced without preamble. "I want to see you play." "Lucia, no, you have midterms coming up," Valentina argued. "You can't miss study time for this." "Mom," Lucia said, using English as she always did when she was being especially serious. "You've spent my entire life putting me first. You worked 3 jobs to send me to college. You never bought yourself anything nice so I could have what I needed. Just this once, let me be there for something that matters to you." Tears sprang to Valentina's eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." After they hung up, Valentina sat at her small kitchen table, emotions swirling through her. Tomorrow night she would play in public for the first time in 20 years. Her daughter would be watching. Wealthy strangers would be listening, judging. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. And yet beneath the fear lay something stronger, a current of determination that had carried her through far worse challenges than a piano recital. She had crossed borders, learned a new language, built a life from nothing. She had survived grief and poverty and loneliness, playing Rachmaninoff for a room full of strangers. Perhaps that wasn't so frightening after all. Valentina closed her eyes and ran through the piece in her mind, her fingers moving in the air above her dinner plate. Tomorrow would come, ready or not, and when it did, she would no longer be just the woman who cleaned the Meridian Piano Lounge. For 8 minutes, the length of the second movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, she would be Valentina Rodriguez, pianist, the woman she was always meant to be. The day of the gala arrived with a light snowfall that dusted Chicago's streets and buildings in a fine layer of white. Valentina woke early, her mind already racing with fragments of Rachmaninoff. She had dreamed of playing, her hands moving confidently over the keys, a good sign, she hoped. She spent the morning going through her normal routine, finding comfort in its familiarity. Clean the apartment, do laundry, prepare a simple lunch, ordinary tasks to ground her on this most extraordinary of days. At noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "Just got on the bus from Michigan. We'll be there by 5, so excited." Valentina smiled, her daughter's enthusiasm both warming and terrifying. Lucia had never heard her truly play. What if she disappointed her? What if the magic Valentina once possessed had faded too much over the years? To quiet her mind, she sat at her kitchen table and played through the Rachmaninoff on its surface, her fingers pressing down on imaginary keys. She had done this countless times as a student when a piano wasn't available. Mental practice, Professor Morales had called it. The technique still helped, allowing her to work through the difficult passages without the distraction of actual sound. By 3 o'clock, Valentina was at the Meridian for one final practice session. The lounge was already being transformed for the evening's event. Staff members moved quietly around her, setting up additional chairs, arranging flowers, and preparing the bar. Richard was everywhere at once, checking the lighting, conferring with the caterers, reviewing the program with his assistant. At the piano, Valentina played through her piece one last time, focusing on the sections that still gave her trouble. It wasn't perfect, would never be perfect after just 2 days of practice, but she could feel the music coming alive under her fingers in a way that had been missing 20 years ago. Back then she had technical precision but lacked the emotional depth that only life experience could bring. Now her technique was rusty, but her understanding of the music's heart had deepened immeasurably. "You should rest your hands now," Diane said, appearing beside the piano in an elegant black evening gown. "Save your energy for tonight." Valentina nodded, closing the fallboard over the keys. "Is there somewhere I can get ready?" "Lucia will be here soon." "Use Richard's office," Diane suggested. "He set it up for you. I'll send your daughter back when she arrives." An hour later, Valentina stood in front of the small mirror in Richard's office, hardly recognizing herself. The deep blue dress transformed her, as did the subtle makeup Diane had helped her apply. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical bun for cleaning, now fell in soft waves around her face, making her look younger, more like the woman she had been before life intervened. A soft knock on the door was followed by Lucia's voice. "Mom, can I come in?" When Valentina opened the door, her daughter's jaw dropped. "Oh my God," Lucia breathed. "You look amazing." They embraced tightly, and Valentina felt a surge of gratitude that her daughter was here to witness this moment. Lucia had sacrificed too, growing up with a mother who worked long hours, who never had time for school events, who couldn't afford the extras that other parents provided easily. "I brought you something," Lucia said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small worn photograph in a simple frame. "I found it in that box of old stuff from Argentina." Valentina took the frame, her throat tightening with emotion. It was a photo of her at her graduation recital, seated at a grand piano, her face flushed with triumph after performing the very piece she would play tonight. Her father stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, pride radiating from his smile. "I thought you might want him with you tonight," Lucia said softly. Valentina nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She placed the photo on Richard's desk, positioning it so she could see it as she made her final preparations. Outside, they could hear the growing hum of voices as guests began to arrive. The Meridian's annual charity gala was a major event in Chicago's social calendar, Richard had explained, raising funds for music education in public schools. Ironic, Valentina thought, that she would make her return to music at an event dedicated to giving children the opportunities she had once taken for granted. At 7:30, Richard knocked on the office door. "They're all seated," he said. "We're running about 15 minutes behind schedule, so you'll be on around 8. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Valentina replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Richard studied her for a moment, then smiled. "You know, when I first suggested this, I thought I was just solving a problem, finding a replacement for Tony. But now I realize it was something else entirely." He gestured toward the lounge. "Those people out there, they've heard professional pianists dozens of times. What they haven't heard is someone playing, not because it's their job, but because it's who they are at their core. That's what you're going to give them tonight, Valentina. Something real." With those words, he left her to her final moments of preparation. Lucia squeezed her hand. "I'll go find my seat." "Break a leg, Mom." Alone in the office, Valentina took deep breaths, centering herself. She glanced at the photograph of her father one last time, drawing strength from his remembered presence. Then she picked up the program Richard had left for her and read her own name, printed alongside those of the other performers. Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2, second movement, Valentina Rodriguez. Seeing it there in black and white made everything suddenly overwhelmingly real. This was happening. After 20 years of silence, she was about to play again. The lounge had been transformed when Valentina emerged from the office. Additional seating had been arranged around the small stage where the piano waited, gleaming under carefully positioned spotlights. The space was filled with people in formal attire, their jewelry catching the light as they turned to speak to one another. Waiters moved smoothly between groups, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. Valentina made her way to a side area near the stage where she could watch without being noticed. A string quartet was currently performing, their music providing an elegant backdrop to the murmured conversations and occasional laughter of the crowd. She scanned the audience, finding Lucia seated near the front, looking somewhat out of place but excitedly taking everything in. Diane was there too, chatting with a group of well-dressed women but periodically glancing toward where Valentina stood, offering encouraging smiles. As the quartet finished to polite applause, Richard stepped onto the small stage. He welcomed everyone to the annual gala, spoke briefly about the charity they were supporting, and thanked the sponsors whose names were displayed on banners around the room. "Before we continue with our program," he said, "I want to share something special with you. Our regular pianist, Tony Fletcher, is unfortunately in the hospital recovering from surgery." There were murmurs of concern from the audience. "He's going to be fine," Richard assured them. "But his absence presented us with a challenge for tonight's event." He paused, and Valentina felt her heart begin to race. "Sometimes, the most extraordinary talents are hidden in plain sight," Richard continued. "Our next performer has been working at the Meridian for several months, not as a musician but as a member of our cleaning staff." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Some exchanged skeptical glances, while others leaned forward with interest. "What you don't know, what I didn't know until very recently, is that she was once a student at the prestigious Buenos Aires Conservatory of Music. Tonight, after a 20-year absence from performing, She returns to the piano to share her extraordinary gift with us. Richard extended his hand toward where Valentina stood. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce Valentina Rodriguez, performing the second movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The applause that followed was polite but reserved, tinged with curiosity and perhaps a touch of skepticism. Valentina stepped forward on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. The short walk to the piano seemed endless, the eyes of every guest following her movement. As she took her seat at the bench, adjusting its height with automatic precision, she caught a glimpse of Lucia's face in the front row, eyes shining with pride and excitement. Beyond her daughter, the audience was a blur of expectant faces. Valentina placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. For a terrifying moment, her mind went completely blank. The notes, the patterns she had been practicing for 2 days solid, all gone, evaporated in the heat of the spotlight. Then, almost of their own accord, her fingers found the opening chords. The rich, melancholy sound filled the room, and Valentina felt herself being drawn into the music, the audience fading away as the familiar landscape of Rachmaninoff's composition opened before her. The second movement of the concerto began gently, like a conversation between close friends. As Valentina played, she forgot about the wealthy strangers watching her. She forgot about the years of cleaning other people's spaces while her own talents gathered dust. She forgot about everything except the story the music was telling, a story of longing, of beauty found in sadness, of hope that persists even in darkness. Her fingers stumbled occasionally over difficult passages, but she recovered quickly, never losing the emotional thread that ran through the piece. As the music built toward its climax, Valentina felt tears pricking at her eyes, not from fear or regret, but from the pure joy of reconnecting with this essential part of herself. The final notes hung in the air like a question, fading slowly into silence. For one terrible moment, there was no response from the audience. Valentina sat frozen at the piano, unable to turn and face them. Then it came, a single pair of hands clapping, then another and another, until the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Valentina finally turned to see the audience on their feet, their faces alight with genuine appreciation. In the front row, Lucia was wiping tears from her cheeks while applauding wildly. As Valentina stood to acknowledge the ovation, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. An older man in the second row was watching her with particular intensity, his expression a mixture of surprise and admiration. She recognized him vaguely, a regular patron of the Meridian, someone whose expensive shoes she had often seen while cleaning around the tables. Richard appeared at her side, taking her hand and raising it triumphantly as the applause continued. "Valentina Rodriguez," he announced again, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, standing in the spotlight with the sound of applause washing over her, Valentina felt a shift deep within herself, as if a door that had been firmly closed for 20 years had finally been reopened, allowing her to step through into a version of her life she had never dared to imagine. The applause eventually faded, and the gala continued with speeches and more performances, but something had changed in the room. People who had barely noticed Valentina when she cleaned their tables now sought her out, eager to congratulate her and ask about her story. She answered their questions politely but briefly, still processing what had just happened. "You were amazing," Lucia kept saying, holding her mother's hand tightly as they stood together near the refreshment table. "I had no idea you could play like that." "Neither did I," Valentina admitted. "Not anymore." As the evening wound down, Richard approached them with the older man Valentina had noticed in the audience, the one who had watched her performance with such intensity. "Valentina, I'd like you to meet someone," Richard said. "This is Dr. Thomas Bennett, director of the Chicago Community Music School." The man extended his hand, his grip firm and warm. "Ms. Rodriguez, your performance tonight was extraordinary. Richard tells me you haven't played regularly in 20 years. Valentina nodded. "That's right. I studied in Buenos Aires but had to stop when my father died." "And you work as a cleaner now?" he asked, his tone curious rather than judgmental. "Yes. I clean offices downtown during the day and here at the Meridian 3 evenings a week." Dr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. "What would you say if I told you we have an opening for a piano instructor at our school? It's part-time to start, just 2 afternoons a week, but it could grow." Valentina stared at him, sure she had misheard. "You want me to teach? But I just told you I haven't played in 20 years. Until tonight," he corrected her. And what I heard tonight was someone who not only understands music technically, but feels it deeply. That's rare, Ms. Rodriguez. That's what makes a truly great teacher. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Think about it. We serve students who can't afford private lessons, many of them immigrants like yourself. They need teachers who understand their challenges. As he moved away to speak with other guests, Valentina looked down at the card in her hand, then at her daughter's excited face. "Mom, you have to do it," Lucia whispered. "This is like something from a movie." Valentina shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know, mijija. It's all happening so fast." "Good things sometimes do," Richard said, still standing nearby. "And this has been a long time coming, Valentina. 20 years too long." Later that night, after the guests had departed and Lucia had gone to sleep on the pull-out sofa in Valentina's small living room, Valentina sat at her kitchen table, still wearing the blue dress. The events of the evening played through her mind like a dream. The nervous walk to the piano, the moment of panic, then the music taking over, carrying her through. She thought about Dr. Bennett's offer. Teaching piano at a community music school was nowhere near the career she had once envisioned for herself. Traveling the world as a concert pianist, performing with major orchestras. But that young woman's dreams had died with her father, or so she had thought. Now holding the business card with the school's address printed in simple black letters, Valentina felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: possibility. The future, which had for so long been a predetermined path of work and sacrifice, suddenly held new branches, new directions she might take. The next morning, Valentina awoke to the smell of coffee. She found Lucia in the kitchen, already dressed and scrolling through her phone with an expression of disbelief. "Mom, you're trending," she announced as Valentina entered the room. "I'm what?" "Someone recorded your performance last night and posted it online. It's got thousands of views already and people are sharing it like crazy." Lucia held up her phone, showing a video of Valentina at the piano, lost in Rachmaninoff's music. The caption read, "Cleaning lady stuns wealthy crowd with incredible piano skills." Valentina sat down heavily, unsure how to feel about this unexpected exposure. Part of her was embarrassed her mistakes would be heard by strangers around the world. But another part felt a strange thrill. After decades of invisibility, of being the person no one noticed or remembered, she had been seen, heard, appreciated for the talent she had buried for so long. Her phone rang. "Richard, have you seen it?" he asked without preamble. "Lucia just showed me," Valentina replied. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll come to the Meridian this afternoon," Richard suggested. "The phone's been ringing nonstop. Reporters want to interview you. We've had calls from 3 television stations." "Television?" Valentina felt panic rising. "No, I can't." "You can," Richard interrupted gently. "Your story is touching people, Valentina. A talented musician who put her dreams aside to support her family, then finds her way back to music after 20 years. People need stories like that. Stories of second chances." After hanging up, Valentina sat quietly, watching Lucia read comments on the video aloud. "This made me cry. Such beautiful playing. I quit piano lessons when I was 12. This makes me want to start again. Who is she? Does she have other performances?" Each comment was a reminder that music didn't just affect the person playing it. It created ripples that touched others in ways you could never predict. Valentina had forgotten that power, the ability of a performer to reach into strangers' hearts and stir something deep within them. That afternoon, against her natural instincts to hide from attention, Valentina returned to the Meridian. Richard had arranged for her to speak with a reporter from the Chicago Tribune, who listened with genuine interest as Valentina shared her story, her early training in Argentina, the family crisis that forced her to abandon music, her immigration to the United States, the chance encounter that led to last night's performance. "What's next for you?" the reporter asked at the end of the interview. Valentina thought about Dr. Bennett's business card, which she had tucked into her purse that morning. "I've been offered a teaching position at the Chicago Community Music School," she said, making the decision as the words left her mouth. "I think I'm going to accept it. Will you continue cleaning as well?" Valentina nodded. "For now, yes. The teaching is just part-time to start, and to be honest, there's dignity in all work that's done well." She smiled slightly, though I might ask to rearrange my schedule at the Meridian so I can listen to the pianists more often. In the days that followed, Valentina's life took on a dream-like quality. The video of her performance continued to circulate online, eventually being picked up by national news outlets. Her story, the cleaning lady pianist they called her, resonated with people in a way she never could have anticipated. Offers began to come in, requests for interviews, invitations to perform at local events, even a few inquiries about private lessons. Valentina navigated this unexpected attention with caution, accepting only what felt right and manageable alongside her existing responsibilities. 2 weeks after the gala, she taught her first class at the Chicago Community Music School. Standing before a group of 8 students ranging in age from 9 to 67, Valentina felt a familiar nervousness, similar to what she had experienced before performing at the Meridian. But as she began to speak about music, about the emotions it could express and the discipline it required, she found her voice. These students, a Mexican girl whose parents worked in a restaurant, a Nigerian teenager who practiced on a keyboard in a shared apartment, a Vietnamese grandmother who had always wanted to learn, they reminded Valentina of herself at different stages of her life. Music is not just about talent, she told them. It's about persistence, about finding beauty even when life is difficult, about expressing what cannot be said in words. She looked around at their expectant faces. I lost music for 20 years. Don't let anyone or anything take it from you. As spring arrived in Chicago, bringing warmth and new growth after the long winter, Valentina's life settled into a new rhythm. She still cleaned offices 3 mornings a week and spent 1 evening at the Meridian, but now she also taught piano 4 afternoons a week at the community school. Dr. Bennett had increased her hours after seeing how well students responded to her teaching style. On Saturday evenings, the Meridian featured a new special event, Classical Spotlight, where local musicians performed short pieces for the lounge's patrons. Valentina became a regular performer, slowly expanding her repertoire beyond the Rachmaninoff that had marked her return to music. Richard often joined her for coffee after these performances, the two of them talking late into the night about music, about life's unexpected turns, about the future. Their friendship had deepened into something neither had anticipated, but both treasured. One evening in May, as they sat at what had become their table near the windows overlooking the river, Richard handed Valentina an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a letter from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, inviting Valentina to perform as a guest soloist for their community concert series in the fall. She looked up at Richard in shock. "Did you do this?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not directly, though I may have mentioned your name to a few people on their board. The video of your performance did the rest." Valentina sat back, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. "I'm not ready for this." "The symphony? You have 5 months to prepare," Richard pointed out. "And you won't be alone. The school has offered to adjust your schedule so you can practice more." "And my cleaning jobs?" Richard's expression softened. "That's up to you, Valentina. But I think the world needs you making music more than it needs you cleaning floors." Later that night, Valentina stood at the window of her apartment, looking out at the city lights. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra invitation lay on her table beside the framed photograph of her father that Lucia had given her the night of the gala. "What would you think, Papa?" she whispered to his smiling image. "Your daughter, playing with an orchestra after all these years?" She could almost hear his answer. "I always knew you would find your way back to music, Valentina. Some talents are too great to stay hidden forever." Valentina touched the glass of the frame gently. 20 years ago, she had made a choice: family over music, responsibility over dreams. It had been the right choice then, the only choice a loving daughter could make. But now life had offered her something unexpected. Not the either-or of her youth, but a both and. A way to honor her responsibilities while reclaiming her passion. A second movement to a piece of music she had thought was finished. The next morning, Valentina would wake early as she always did. She would make coffee and prepare for her day. But as she moved through the familiar routines of her life, her fingers would dance with new purpose, already practicing the music that waited for her at the piano. The music that had always been there, patient and persistent, waiting for her return.